and of Russia against its much smaller domains in Eastern Europe. Each great power used the other's threats as a pretext.
The major objectives in Vietnam are pretty much what they were in Cuba, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Congo, all around the world. They were afraid that Vietnam was going to undergo successful social and economic development, and as it's put in high places, the rot might spread to others. It might lead to ideological victories for the mode of socioeconomic development that they're pursuing. The virus might infect others, as Kissinger put it with regard to Chile. Well, when you have a virus, what do you do with it? You kill the virus and you inoculate the potential victims, and that's what happened. Indochina was killed. Not going to, maybe it'll survive, but it's not going to be a model for anything. And the surrounding region was inoculated. In the 60s and early 70s, the U.S. succeeded in installing brutal and vicious military dictators in every country. And that prevented the rot from spreading.
I always found when in any discussion on war, inevitably, in any discussion on war, at a certain point in the discussion, somebody would say, oh well, it's human nature. Well, first of all, from my own experience, and I still have to tell this to people because there are still people who talk about the desire of young men to go to war, the thrill it is for young men to be in war, to shoot their guns, to kill. And I thought about my own experience in the Air Force, and it was very clear to me, looking around at all these guys around me who were dropping bombs and who were killing people, that did not come from inside. It did not come from, oh God, how good it would be to kill some people today. There was no urge to kill, even though they were the enemy. No. What it came from was simply we had been trained. And also we had been told it's a good war. We had been told we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. It'll be bad if they won, it'll be good if we win. We've got to drop the bombs. And then when I got away from my own experiences and just began to study history and history of wars, something else became clear to me. And that is, wars don't take place out of the rush of a population demanding war. It isn't the population that demands war, it's the leaders who demand war and who prepare the population for war.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb.
Nuclear weapon, nuclear weapon, nuclear weapon.
Active chemical munitions bunkers, mobile production facilities.
We know he's got chemical weapons. He's got them, he's got them, he's got them.
And it was clear to me from looking at the works of anthropologists, there were some tribes that were fierce and some tribes that were peaceful. It clearly wasn't a universal quality. It depended on the conditions under which they lived. And this guy, Colin Turnbull, wrote books about the forest people and the mountain people. And the forest people, the pygmies in the forest, lived under the kind of conditions which made them...
But what we have in history is the fact that when surplus value develops, when there's more than a subsistence economy, you have some portion of the population that will do everything it can to enslave and to expropriate the labor of the rest of the people. And one of the things that's used in that arrangement is a very conscious instrument of control.
Don't tase me, bro! Don't tase me! I didn't do anything! Ow! Ow! Ow!
An organization that has a monopoly on the legitimate uses of force and violence. And that instrument is called the state.
They won't loot slaves' power. And with this, they don't get them.
There's a current version of that, a crude version by Thomas Friedman, who says that McDonald's cannot flourish without McDonnell Douglas, meaning the U.S. Air Force.
I was invited to Washington, D.C. to attend this meeting that was being put together by the National Security Agency called the Critical Thinking Consortium. I remember standing there in this room and looking over on one side of the room, and we had CIA, NSA, DIA, FBI, Customs, Secret Service, and then on the other side of the room we had Coca-Cola, Mobil Oil, GTE, and Kodak. And I remember thinking, I am like in the epicenter of the intelligence industry right now. I mean, the line is not just blurring, it's just not there anymore.
But don't you sometimes need big government to deal with big business, that in a sense there is a kind of balance between these large forces?
It's like saying there's a balance between two members of the board of directors of General Motors. Yes, there's some kind of a balance, but they're so closely interlinked and connected that they're, to first approximation, they're the same thing.
Of course, this doesn't mean that some governments are not better than others, or that governments cannot offer a certain degree of protection against market forces. It doesn't mean that the public cannot have a certain degree of democratic influence over government, or that they cannot have more influence over government than they do over totally undemocratic institutions like corporations. After all, most of the freedoms that we enjoy in the West have been the product of successful grassroots struggles, like the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, etc., which were able to influence and constrain governments, corporations, and other elite institutions, which subsequently took credit for the freedoms gained by these struggles. What it means is that freedoms are usually not a gift from above, and that when they are either incidental or they foster dependence and subordination, creating hierarchy. Government, whether it calls itself Republican, Democrat, Socialist, Capitalist, Communist, or whatever, is a means by which a minority controls a majority, either by itself or in conjunction with other powerful entities like corporations. Here, the concept of property is important. Having property for personal use and need, like a home, a bed, a toothbrush, etc., does not require government, but when one's private property extends beyond those items to the means of production, like industries, large swaths of land, or any property that is not for personal use, then the need for government appears. When property is used to deprive others of access to the basic necessities of life, or when property is used to derive profit at the expense of others without having to work, simply by granting permission to use the means of production, then the need for government appears.
Till there be property, there can be no government, the very end of which is to secure wealth and to defend the rich from the poor.
The great and chief end of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property.
Those who own the country ought to govern it.
Government ought to be so constituted as to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority.
Camarada Durruti, a los lectores del New York Herald les gustaría saber si ustedes, los anarquistas, se consideran a las órdenes del gobierno o si por el contrario están enfrentados a él.
Se trata de aplastar para siempre al fascismo, y ello si hace falta a pesar del gobierno. Tal vez un día no lejano, este mismo gobierno tenga necesidad de los militares rebeldes para destruir el movimiento obrero. Luchamos por la revolución, no esperamos ayuda de nadie. Les mostraremos a ustedes, los bolcheviques rusos, cómo se hace la revolución. En su país hay dictadura. En el Ejército Rojo hay coroneles y generales, mientras que en mi columna no hay jefes ni subordinados. Todos somos iguales en derechos. Todos somos soldados. Yo también soy un simple soldado.
Se acusa a los hombres de su columna de haber caído en un cierto desorden. Caos, dicen algunos. Los militares profesionales tienen dificultades para hacerse respetar. ¿Usted qué opina?
Los burgueses siempre tienden a identificar la libertad con el caos. Hemos organizado el entusiasmo, no la obediencia. Cada hombre, cada mujer es responsable ante sí mismo y ante los demás. Esa es nuestra fuerza. Nosotros, los obreros, estamos destinados a heredar la tierra.
Con toda seguridad, será un triunfo muy costoso. Descansarán sobre un montón de ruinas.
No tenemos miedo a las ruinas. Los obreros hemos construido los palacios y ciudades de España y América. Podemos volver a hacerlo. La burguesía podrá hacer saltar en pedazos su mundo antes de abandonar el escenario de la historia. Pero nosotros llevamos en el corazón un mundo nuevo. Y ese mundo crece a cada instante. Está creciendo ahora mientras hablo con vosotros.
Society could be managed without the state. And by the state, I don't mean the absence of any institutions, the absence of any form of social organization. The state really refers to a professional apparatus of people who are set aside to manage society, to preempt the control of society from the people.
You know, the people are being asked to die and pay for this, and you're saying they have no say in this war.
No, I didn't say that, Helen, but Helen, this president was elected.
It amounts to it. You're saying we have no input at all.
No, you had input. The American people have input every 4 years, and that's the way our system is set up.
It is only natural that those on top of the hierarchy will try to limit public input by creating conflict and division. That is, by promoting unity only as it relates to a uniform support for elite ideology and action. And it's only natural that violence and deceit will be used to suppress the freedom instinct of the masses. After all, if the subordinate majority ever unite, elite power could be jeopardized. In fact, not only do power structures create situations where we oppress each other, but they create situations where we defend and become attached to our own oppressors. In other words, those at the top of a hierarchy become part of us, like an extension of our egos. The most obvious example of a hierarchical power structure having this effect is the state. Worship of the state has become a secular religion for which the intellectuals serve as a priesthood. The more primitive sectors of society go further, fostering forms of idolatry in which such sacred symbols as the flag become an object of forced veneration, while God and state are linked in public ceremony and discourse. But the state is not the only major hierarchical organization with control over our lives.
Every institution provides the people who are members of it with a social role to occupy. And typically, institutions that are vibrant and have a lot of power will specify that role in some sense as a list of virtues. It's true for churches, for schools, for any institution that has power over people and shapes them.
One nation.
The corporation, likewise, it provides us with a list of virtues, a kind of social role, which is the good consumer.
Like the waters of a mighty ocean, people also represent a tremendous force, the understanding of which is of greatest importance to the American way of life. This force is known as consumer power.
The goal for the corporations is to maximize profit and market share, and they also have a goal for their target, namely the population. They have to be turned into completely mindless consumers of goods that they do not want. You have to develop what are called created wants. So you have to create wants. You have to impose on people what's called a philosophy of futility. You have to focus them on the insignificant things of life, like fashionable consumption. I'm just basically quoting business literature. And it makes perfect sense. The ideal is to have individuals who are totally dissociated from one another, whose conception of themselves, the sense of value, is just how many created wants can I satisfy.
These people are customers because they are willing to trade money for widgets. And all the customers take their widgets home to all parts of